What if the most terrifying weapon of the medieval world wasn't invented in the 7th century at all, but inherited from an age so ancient that history itself forgot it existed? Most people believe Greek fire was a Byzantine innovation, a triumph of medieval ingenuity. The truth might be far more disturbing. A recovered technology from a civilization that mastered chemistry thousands of years before it should have been possible. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel if you enjoy these stories. Write in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I always find it fascinating to see people from around the world united by one story. This is a story for sleep, so get comfortable, dim your screen brightness and lower the volume to a comfortable level. Let this story become a bridge to your dreams. Constantinople, 672 CE. Arab ships crowded the Bosporus Strait, their sails blocking the horizon like a forest of shadows advancing on the great city. The Byzantine Empire faced annihilation. Emperor Constantine IV stood on the sea walls watching an armada that outnumbered his fleet 3-1. Every naval engagement for the past year had ended in Byzantine retreat. The Arabs controlled the Mediterranean, had conquered Syria, Egypt and North Africa. Constantinople was the last barrier before Europe fell to the Caliphate. Then came the fire that changed everything. Byzantine dromons emerged from the Golden Horn harbour at dawn, smaller vessels facing an overwhelming force. Arab commanders ordered the attack, confident this would be the final battle. The Byzantine ships approached within throwing distance. Copper tubes mounted on their prows swiveled toward the enemy fleet. What happened next defied every law of warfare known to the medieval world. Liquid flame erupted from the tubes, arcing across the water in streams of brilliant orange and white. The substance hit Arab sails and ignited with such intensity that wood, cloth and rope disintegrated in seconds. Sailors jumped overboard to escape the inferno. The flames followed them into the sea. Water didn't extinguish the fire. It spread across the surface, turning the Bosporus into a burning lake. Men thrashed in agony as the substance clung to their skin, burning hotter when wet. Ships that tried to rescue survivors caught fire from mere proximity to the flames. The Arab fleet disintegrated within hours. 70 ships reduced to charred wreckage floating in water that still burned as the sun set. Survivors who reached shore told stories that sounded like demon magic. Fire that water couldn't kill. Flames that burned underwater. A weapon so terrible that soldiers preferred death by sword than capture by those who wielded it. The Byzantines called it Greek fire. For the next 7 centuries it protected Constantinople from every invasion, crusade and siege. Enemies learned to fear even the sight of the bronze tubes that delivered it. The mere rumour that Greek fire would be deployed caused armies to retreat. But here's what historians struggle to explain. The weapon appeared fully formed, with no developmental history, no experimental phase, no gradual improvement. 1 year it didn't exist. The next year, Byzantium possessed the most advanced chemical weapon the world would see until the 20th century. The official story credits Callinicus, an architect and refugee from Heliopolis in Syria. He supposedly invented the formula after fleeing the Arab conquest, presenting his discovery to Emperor Constantine IV as a gift that would save the empire. The emperor rewarded him with gold, titles and estates. Callinicus became a hero. His descendants guarded the secret for generations. Except Callinicus wasn't a chemist. He wasn't an alchemist. His background showed expertise in building construction, nothing more. Architectural treatises, temple designs, hydraulic engineering. His known work involved structures, not substances. How does a building designer suddenly create a chemical compound that wouldn't be matched in sophistication for 1,000 years? The formula required understanding concepts that medieval science didn't possess. Greek fire burned at temperatures exceeding anything produced by wood or coal fires. It maintained combustion underwater by generating its own oxygen through chemical reaction. The delivery system used pressure pumps and siphons operating at tolerances that shouldn't have been achievable with 7th century metallurgy. The weapon represented mastery of thermodynamics, fluid mechanics, and combustion chemistry centuries before those fields existed. Modern chemists who've studied historical accounts estimate the formula involved naphtha, quicklime, sulfur, and at least 3 other components that remain unknown. The proportions had to be exact. Too much of one ingredient and the mixture wouldn't ignite. Too little, and it wouldn't burn hot enough. The substance needed stability during storage but instant volatility when deployed. This wasn't something stumbled upon by accident. It was engineered. And Callinicus appeared in Constantinople with it complete, functional, ready for mass production. The Byzantines immediately recognized they possessed something extraordinary. Emperor Constantine IV issued an imperial decree making disclosure of the formula punishable by death, not just for the person who revealed it, but for their entire family. Production facilities were built in sealed underground chambers accessible only through the imperial palace. Workers were divided into separate groups, each knowing only one step of the manufacturing process. No single person except the emperor and designated family members ever knew the complete formula. This wasn't normal secrecy for a military advantage. This was terror. The Byzantines guarded Greek fire with paranoia that suggested they understood they possessed something that shouldn't exist. Historical records contain another troubling detail. When Callinicus first demonstrated the weapon to imperial officials, he didn't present it as his invention. Ancient sources describe him as a keeper of secrets and guardian of ancient knowledge. Byzantine chronicles mention that he brought scrolls from the old times, and that he'd obtained the formula from those who came before. Who came before? The texts never specify. Most historians dismiss these references as flowery language, medieval exaggeration meant to make the weapon seem mystical. But scattered through archives across Europe and the Middle East are older documents, much older, that describe weapons matching Greek fire's exact properties. These texts predate Callinicus by centuries, sometimes millennia. A Persian military manual from 400 CE describes naval warfare using fire that water cannot quench. The tactics outlined match Byzantine Greek fire deployment precisely. The manual references the formula as ancient even in the 5th century, something passed down from the time of elder kings. Roman texts from the 1st century mention consulting with Egyptian priests about eternal flames used in temple defences. These weren't oil lamps. The descriptions specify flames that burn upon the water and cannot be extinguished by any means known to men. The priests claim the knowledge came from dynasties predating the pyramids. Greek historians writing 500 years before Christ recorded Median fire weapons that ate through iron and stone. Assyrian military accounts from the 9th century BCE describe siege warfare using substances that burn without cease and consume all they touch. The cuneiform tablets call these weapons gifts from the gods, technology from the first civilization. How far back does this go? Mesopotamian fragments dated to 2400 BCE reference divine fire, used in warfare between city-states. The descriptions aren't metaphorical. They detail specific effects, tactical applications, and warnings about handling procedures. One tablet explicitly states the formula came from kings who ruled before the Great Flood, a reference to prehistoric times even by ancient Mesopotamian standards. Every few centuries, it seems, someone rediscovers this weapon. It appears, devastates battlefields, then disappears again when civilizations collapse, or knowledge gets deliberately suppressed. The pattern repeats across 3,000 years of recorded history. Each time, the discoverers treat it not as something new, but as something recovered. Ancient texts use words like restored, reclaimed, and awakened when describing these rediscoveries. Greek fire's appearance in Byzantine hands might have been just the latest iteration of a weapon that's been found and lost and found again throughout human history. If Callinicus truly was a keeper of ancient knowledge, then he didn't invent anything. He uncovered something buried in texts and formulas, preserved from an age that's been systematically erased from historical memory. The Byzantines used Greek fire for 700 years. Then the formula vanished. When Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Turks in 1453, the secret died with the last imperial family members who knew it. Or perhaps they destroyed it deliberately, understanding that some knowledge is too dangerous to survive. Modern attempts to recreate Greek fire have all failed. Scientists can approximate the effects but never achieve the exact properties described in historical accounts. Something remains missing, an ingredient, a technique, a fundamental understanding that's been lost, unless it was never meant to be remembered in the first place. The trail of fire weapons doesn't begin with Callinicus, or even with the Romans. It stretches back through civilizations that supposedly never advanced beyond bronze tools and basic agriculture. Ancient Greek scholars recorded something extraordinary in their accounts of the Persian Wars. During Xerxes' invasion of Greece in 480 BCE, Persian siege engineers deployed a substance against Greek fortifications that burned with such fury that stone itself melted. Herodotus documented this weapon but dismissed it as Persian exaggeration. Modern historians followed his lead for centuries. Then archaeologists excavated the siege sites. The stone walls showed thermal damage inconsistent with wood fires or even modern blowtorches. Limestone had vitrified, turned to glass, which requires sustained temperatures above 1400 degrees Celsius. Standard ancient siege fires reached perhaps 800 degrees at maximum intensity. Something far more powerful had been used. The damage patterns matched thermal signatures that wouldn't be seen again in warfare until World War II incendiary bombs. The Persians hadn't invented this weapon either. Their own records, preserved in fragments at Persepolis, reference obtaining the formula from Median sorcerers who themselves claimed inheritance from the kingdom that ruled before kingdoms were named. The texts describe elaborate precautions during manufacture and storage, suggesting familiarity born from long experience rather than recent innovation. Median civilization flourished around 700 BCE in what is now Iran. Their military treatises survived in later Persian copies, and 3 of these documents explicitly detail incendiary weapons. The formulas contain precise measurements, specific heating sequences, and warnings about ingredient combinations that could cause spontaneous ignition. This wasn't theoretical knowledge. The instructions read like modern chemical protocols, step-by-step procedures developed through extensive testing. One Median text warns that the flame mixture must never touch gold, because the reaction would consume the metal and all nearby. Another specifies that certain ingredients must be mixed only under the new moon when air holds less moisture. These aren't superstitions, they're sophisticated observations about humidity's effect on chemical stability. The Medians understood concepts in chemistry that wouldn't be formally documented until the 18th century. Where did they learn it? The texts themselves provide an answer that historians have systematically ignored. The Median military manuals state clearly that the formulas came from tablets recovered from the buried cities of the south, referring to Mesopotamian sites already ancient when the Medians rose to power. Archaeological expeditions in the 19th century found exactly such tablets, cuneiform records describing chemical processes in detail that seemed impossible for the Bronze Age. These Mesopotamian documents date to the Akkadian Empire around 2300 BCE. They describe weapons used in warfare between city-states, substances that bring divine fire to enemies of the king. The tablets weren't mythological texts. They were technical manuals, administrative records documenting production quotas and ingredient requisitions. One tablet from lists deliveries of naphtha, sulfur and minerals, whose Akkadian names don't translate clearly but appear to be metallic compounds. The quantities specified were enormous. Annual production records suggest industrial-scale manufacturing of incendiary substances, not small batches for ceremonial use. The Akkadians were mass-producing chemical weapons 3,000 years before the Byzantine Empire existed. But the Akkadian texts themselves reference even older sources. Multiple tablets mention consulting the wisdom of those who came before the Great Water, a clear reference to the flood mythology common across Mesopotamian cultures. These weren't religious invocations. The texts specifically state that formulas were recovered from the old temples and preserved from the first cities. The Akkadians were copying knowledge from civilizations that predated them. Sumerian records push the timeline back further still. The earlier Sumerian city-states emerged around 4500 BCE, and their texts contain references to fire that eats stone, used in conflicts between cities. These aren't vague mythological descriptions. Sumerian administrative tablets from Uruk detail ingredient procurement for divine fire production, list workers assigned to manufacturing facilities, and record accidents during production that killed dozens of people. The accidents themselves are revealing. One tablet describes an explosion at a production facility in Eridu that brought down the temple walls and burned for 3 days without ceasing. The damage assessment mentions ground that remained too hot to approach for weeks afterward. Another record details a storage failure where the fire substance awakened itself and destroyed an entire district. These were industrial disasters resulting from handling sophisticated chemical compounds. The Sumerians attributed this knowledge to the Anunnaki, beings they described as teachers who brought civilization to humanity. Modern scholars interpret this as mythology, gods imagined to explain natural phenomena. But Sumerian texts don't describe the Anunnaki as supernatural. They're presented as physical beings who lived in cities, taught specific crafts, and passed on technical knowledge before departing. The tablets read more like historical records of a predecessor civilization than religious mythology. Egyptian sources add another layer to this mystery. Papyri from the Old Kingdom, contemporary with the pyramid's construction around 2500 BCE, mention temple defences using eternal flames that burned without fuel. These weren't oil lamps. The texts specify that the flames cannot be doused and consume all who approach without proper knowledge. Temple archives contained formulas known only to the highest-ranking priests, knowledge passed from one generation to the next under oaths of absolute secrecy. One remarkable papyrus, discovered at Abydos in 1903 and largely ignored by mainstream Egyptology, describes an incident at the Temple of Osiris. Priests attempting to recreate an ancient defensive formula caused a fire that burned upon the Nile itself and killed 43 people. The papyrus explicitly states the formula came from dynasties before dynasties, meaning periods predating the first dynasty, before 3100 BCE, before Egyptian civilization officially began. The pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Multiple ancient civilizations across thousands of miles, separated by centuries or millennia, all describe the same type of weapon. All claim they inherited rather than invented it. All trace the knowledge back to civilizations that came before them. These weren't isolated innovations developing independently. The descriptions match too precisely. Flames that water cannot extinguish. substances that burn underwater, reactions requiring specific temperature control and exact proportions, chemical processes demanding understanding of principles that shouldn't have been known. The same technology appearing again and again, always presented as rediscovered ancient knowledge. Ancient Chinese texts contribute further evidence. The Mojing, a military treatise from the 4th century BCE, describes self-generating fire used in naval warfare. The formula listed includes ingredients recognizable as petroleum derivatives, sulfur compounds, and mysterious additions the text calls metal that loves fire. Modern chemists suggest this might be magnesium or phosphorus, elements that wouldn't be isolated and identified until the 1800s. Yet Chinese military engineers apparently knew how to obtain and use them 2,000 years earlier. The Mojing attributes this knowledge to the Yellow Emperor, a legendary figure said to have ruled around 2700 BCE. Whether this emperor existed matters less than what the attribution reveals. The Chinese, like the Mesopotamians, Egyptians, Greeks, and Persians, considered incendiary weapon technology to be ancient knowledge passed down from civilization's founders. Sanskrit texts from India describe similar weapons in even more troubling detail. The Mahabharata, an epic poem compiled around 400 BCE but containing much older material, depicts warfare using weapons of the gods that produce effects matching not just Greek fire but modern thermobaric explosives. The descriptions specify flames that consume everything within their range, heat so intense it boils the water in soldiers' bodies, and fires that cannot be extinguished by any earthly means. Scholars have long dismissed these passages as poetic exaggeration, fantasy warfare in an epic tale. But the Mahabharata provides technical details about these weapons, how they're transported, storage requirements, safety protocols during deployment. One passage warns that certain weapons must be used only when no other choice remains, because they poison the earth for generations. This sounds less like mythology and more like someone describing actual experience with chemical or radiological contamination. Indian military texts from the same period, the Arthashastra attributed to Chanakya around 300 BCE, give practical instructions for various incendiary weapons. The formulas include proportions, mixing procedures, and deployment tactics. These aren't religious or mythological texts. They're military manuals meant for practical use by army commanders. The Arthashastra explicitly states that many of these formulas were preserved from the first kingdoms that existed before the Great Darkness, another reference to a catastrophic period that ended an earlier civilization. Every ancient culture seems to have fragments of this knowledge. Celtic druids in pre-Roman Britain supposedly wielded fires that could not be quenched during battles against Roman legions. Nordic sagas mention dragon fire weapons used by ancient kings. Mayan codices, most destroyed by Spanish conquistadors, contained references to ceremonial fires that burned without consuming wood. African oral traditions speak of ancient empires that wielded flames requiring secret knowledge of the earth's power. These fragments all point toward a disturbing conclusion. Advanced chemical knowledge existed in humanity's deep past. This wasn't primitive experimentation with burning materials. Multiple ancient sources describe sophisticated understanding of combustion, chemical reactions, temperature control, and material science. Knowledge that supposedly wouldn't be developed until the modern age was already known, used, and carefully guarded thousands of years ago. Then it started disappearing. Between 1200 BCE and 1000 BCE, a wave of catastrophic collapse swept through the Mediterranean and Near East. The Bronze Age ended in fire and chaos. Advanced civilizations fell within decades. Writing systems vanished. Trade networks collapsed. Cities were abandoned. The historical record goes dark. When civilization re-emerged centuries later, much of the ancient knowledge was gone. Later cultures found tablets and texts they could barely understand, formulas they could partly recreate but never fully master. The knowledge became fragmentary, preserved in scattered archives, guarded by priesthoods and secret societies, surfacing occasionally when someone managed to piece together enough information to make the ancient weapons work again. Greek fire was one such resurgence. Callinicus didn't invent it. He recovered it from texts that had survived the collapse, formulas preserved through channels that had kept them hidden for 1,000 years. The Byzantines recognized they'd rediscovered something from a more advanced age. That's why they guarded it with such paranoia. They understood they possessed inherited technology from a civilization capable of creating weapons that medieval minds could barely comprehend. The question isn't whether Greek fire was invented in the 7th century. The question is how many times it was invented before that, and what happened to the civilizations that mastered such terrible knowledge. Between the collapse of the ancient world and the Byzantine Empire's rise, knowledge didn't simply vanish. It went underground, preserved by networks that operated in shadows for 1,000 years. Medieval Europe contained hidden communities of scholars who called themselves many things: alchemists, philosophers, keepers of mysteries. Mainstream history dismisses them as superstitious mystics chasing impossible dreams of turning lead to gold. The truth was more dangerous. These networks were preserving and transmitting technical knowledge from civilizations that officially never existed. Alchemical texts from the early medieval period contained formulas that read like modern chemistry, disguised in symbolic language. The philosophical mercury wasn't a mystical substance. It was liquid metal processed in specific ways. The Red Lion described a compound of gold and antimony with precise applications. Green vitriol meant iron sulfate, critical for various chemical processes. Alchemists used coded language not to seem mysterious, but because possessing such knowledge could mean execution. The Church viewed advanced chemical knowledge as heretical. Anyone demonstrating understanding beyond accepted limits faced charges of witchcraft or demonic pact. Alchemists developed elaborate symbolic systems to hide technical information in plain sight. A recipe for incendiary compounds might be written as instructions for awakening the dragon or marrying the Red King with the White Queen. The symbolism wasn't mysticism, it was encryption. Certain families maintain these traditions across generations, passing formulas from parent to child in carefully guarded ceremonies. The Medici family in Florence, famous for banking and political power, originated as keepers of medical and chemical knowledge. Medici literally means physicians. Their rise to wealth began with monopolies on specific dyes, medicines, and preservatives whose formulas they possessed but never publicly revealed. Archives suggest the Medicis inherited these formulas from earlier Italian families who traced their lineage to Roman patricians. Those Roman families in turn claimed descent from mystery cults that preserved knowledge from the Greek world. The chain extends backward through time, each generation receiving and protecting information from the previous one. These weren't random collections of recipes. The formulas showed systematic understanding of chemistry that wouldn't be officially discovered for centuries. Similar networks existed across the Islamic world. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad, established in the 9th century, became famous for translating Greek and Roman texts. But scholars there also had access to older sources: Mesopotamian tablets, Persian archives, Egyptian papyri that had survived the Library of Alexandria's destruction. Islamic alchemists like Jabir ibn Hayyan developed techniques and substances that European chemists wouldn't rediscover until the Renaissance. Jabir's surviving works describe processes requiring precise temperature control, distillation equipment, an understanding of chemical reactions at levels suggesting he wasn't pioneering but recovering ancient methodologies. His texts reference Books of the First Teachers and Wisdom from Before the Chaos, indicating source materials from civilizations predating the Islamic Golden Age. Several of his formulas for incendiary substances match components believed to be in Greek fire. The Knights Templar represented another knowledge-keeping network. Founded during the Crusades, officially to protect Christian pilgrims, the Templars rapidly accumulated wealth and power that seemed inexplicable for a military order. Their headquarters sat on Temple Mount in Jerusalem, directly above ruins containing thousands of years of accumulated documents and artifacts. The Templars excavated extensively beneath their headquarters for decades. What they found transformed them from simple knights into an organization that rivaled kingdoms. The Templars developed banking systems, engineering techniques, and metallurgical processes far ahead of their time. Their fortresses incorporated architectural innovations that wouldn't appear in secular construction for another century. They possessed maps showing lands supposedly undiscovered. Their fleet utilized navigation techniques no one could explain. When the Templars were arrested and destroyed in 1307, the charges included heresy, but the real concern was what knowledge they possessed. King Philip IV of France wanted their wealth, certainly, but papal authorities feared their secrets more. During interrogations, Templars mentioned ancient texts recovered from Solomon's Temple and knowledge from the time of the First Kingdoms. Many were executed specifically for refusing to reveal what they had discovered beneath Jerusalem. The Templar fleet disappeared days before the mass arrests. 18 ships carrying who knows what documents sailed from La Rochelle and vanished from historical record. Some researchers suggest they reached Scotland, others claim the Americas. Wherever they went, they took their recovered knowledge with them. Templar symbols began appearing in unexpected places, carved stones in pre-Columbian style sites in North America, architectural elements in Scottish chapels showing American plants decades before Columbus sailed, navigation charts that depicted coastlines supposedly unknown. Other religious orders preserved knowledge through different methods. Benedictine monasteries maintained vast libraries where monks copied ancient texts, supposedly for religious purposes. But these scriptoriums preserved more than scripture. Monks copied technical treatises, medical formulas, and chemical procedures found in ancient manuscripts. The copying process required understanding the material, and certain monasteries developed expertise in specific technical areas. The monastery at Monte Cassino in Italy became renowned for medical knowledge that surpassed anything available in medieval Europe. Monks there treated conditions using compounds and procedures documented nowhere else. When researchers finally gained access to the monastery's deepest archives in the 20th century, they found copies of Greek, Roman, and even older medical texts that had been considered lost. The monks had been quietly preserving and using ancient knowledge for over 1,000 years. Similar discoveries occurred at other monasteries. St. Gallen in Switzerland held technical drawings for machinery that shouldn't have existed in the Middle Ages. The Abbey of Cluny possessed metallurgical formulas that would have revolutionized European industry if they'd been made public. Manuscripts at Durham Cathedral described astronomical observations accurate to levels requiring instruments not officially invented until the 1600s. The pattern reveals an underground network spanning centuries and continents. Knowledge preservation wasn't random survival of scattered texts. It was systematic, organized protection of information deemed too important or too dangerous to be lost. Different organizations specialized in different areas. Alchemists kept chemical formulas, Templars guarded architectural and engineering knowledge, monasteries preserved medical and astronomical data. But they all shared one characteristic. They traced their knowledge to sources predating medieval civilization, often by thousands of years. The ancient wisdom they claimed to protect wasn't metaphorical. It was technical information from civilizations that mainstream history insisted never existed at an advanced level. Damascus steel provides a concrete example of this hidden knowledge. Between 1100 CE and 1700 CE, Syrian blacksmiths produced sword blades of quality unmatched anywhere in the world. The steel showed microscopic structures, carbon nanotubes and cementite nanowires that wouldn't be seen again until 21st century laboratories. The forging technique required understanding metallurgy at a molecular level. Damascus smiths learned their craft through master-apprentice relationships stretching back centuries. They attributed the technique to old masters who learned from the first smiths. When researchers analysed ancient blades from before 1000 CE, they found the same microscopic structures. The technique wasn't medieval innovation, it was inherited knowledge. When the last Damascus smiths died without passing on the complete formula in the 1700s, the technique was lost. Modern metallurgists still can't fully replicate it. Roman concrete represents another inherited technology. Structures built 2,000 years ago using Roman concrete remain standing, while modern concrete deteriorates within decades. The Roman formula incorporated volcanic ash in specific proportions with lime and seawater, creating a chemical reaction that actually strengthens over time. This wasn't accidental discovery. Roman texts describe the formula as learned from Etruscan builders who themselves claimed inheritance from the old Mediterranean peoples. When Rome fell, the concrete formula disappeared. Medieval Europeans built with inferior materials because the knowledge had been lost. Researchers didn't rediscover the secret until analysing Roman structures with electron microscopes in the 21st century. The formula required understanding of chemical reactions at levels that Romans shouldn't have possessed. Byzantine authorities understood they lived in an age of degraded knowledge. Imperial libraries contained texts they couldn't fully understand, formulas they could partially replicate but never completely master. When Callinicus arrived with his formula for Greek fire, the Byzantines recognized it immediately as recovered ancient knowledge, not new invention. That's precisely why they guarded it so zealously. The empire maintained an office called the Keeper of Sacred Secrets, responsible for protecting inherited knowledge. This official oversaw production of Greek fire, but also guarded other formulas, architectural techniques, and technical processes that Byzantium had acquired from older sources. The position always went to members of the imperial family because the knowledge was considered too critical to trust to outsiders. Records from this office, fragmentary as they are, mention archives from the First Rome and texts recovered from Alexandria before the burning. The Byzantines explicitly acknowledged they were preserving and using knowledge from civilizations that preceded them. They weren't innovating. They were carefully maintaining technologies inherited from a more advanced age. When Constantinople fell in 1453, the last keeper of sacred secrets was Constantine Palaiologos, the final Byzantine emperor. He died defending the city walls. Whether he destroyed the archives before the fall, or whether the Ottomans captured them remains unknown. The Ottoman Empire never deployed Greek fire, suggesting the formula either died with Constantine or was destroyed to prevent it falling into enemy hands. But fragments survived elsewhere. Venetian archives contain Byzantine documents smuggled west during the empire's final years. Genoese traders preserved technical treatises acquired from Constantinople. Russian monasteries received manuscripts carried by Byzantine refugees fleeing the Ottoman conquest. The knowledge scattered but didn't entirely vanish. Renaissance Europe saw an explosion of rediscovered ancient knowledge. Scholars found Roman and Greek texts that had been preserved in monasteries and private libraries, but they also encountered much older material. documents in languages barely understood, formulas using archaic terminology, technical information that seemed impossibly advanced for its supposed time period. Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks contain designs for machines that wouldn't be built for centuries: helicopters, tanks, submarines. Some historians call him a genius ahead of his time. Others note that Leonardo had access to Vatican libraries containing ancient manuscripts most scholars never saw. His designs often include notes like, "as described in the old text," or "following the pattern of the ancients." He might have been less inventor and more interpreter of inherited knowledge. The same pattern appears throughout the Renaissance. Sudden advances in multiple fields simultaneously: architecture, astronomy, engineering, medicine. Scholars claim to be rediscovering classical knowledge, but the information they found often exceeded what Greeks and Romans had officially achieved. They were tapping into something older, fragments of technical knowledge that had been preserved through the dark centuries by networks dedicated to protecting dangerous wisdom. Greek fire's formula remained hidden in this underground network even after the Byzantine Empire fell. Certain families, certain organizations continued to guard it. Occasionally hints surface, an 18th century alchemist's journal mentioning the Byzantine flame formula, passed down through his master's lineage. A 19th century secret society's archive listing Aqua Incendia Perpetua as one of its protected mysteries. A 20th century discovery of encrypted medieval manuscripts containing what appeared to be chemical formulas for self-sustaining combustion. The knowledge never fully died. It continued existing in shadows, protected by those who understood that some technologies are too dangerous for general knowledge. The question isn't whether Greek fire's formula survived. The question is who still possesses it, and what else they've kept hidden. Modern chemistry reveals why Greek fire remains impossible to recreate. The weapon required knowledge that shouldn't have existed in any ancient civilization. 21st century researchers attempting to reconstruct the formula face a fundamental problem. Historical accounts describe properties that violate what medieval technology could achieve. The substance needed to remain stable during storage for months, yet ignite instantly upon deployment. It had to maintain combustion underwater while generating temperatures exceeding 1800 degrees Celsius. The delivery system required pressurized projection at ranges up to 50 meters using hand-pumped mechanisms. Each requirement demands sophisticated understanding of chemical principles. Stability during storage means the components couldn't be pre-mixed. They had to combine during deployment through a mechanism that allowed precise proportioning at high pressure. Underwater combustion requires oxidizing agents that generate oxygen faster than water can absorb heat. Extreme temperatures need compounds that release energy through exothermic reactions far beyond simple burning. Modern laboratories can create substances matching some of these properties. Thermite burns underwater and reaches appropriate temperatures. White phosphorus ignites spontaneously and maintains combustion in hostile environments. Napalm adheres to surfaces and resists water. But no single modern compound matches all the characteristics described in Byzantine sources. Greek fire combined properties that even contemporary chemistry struggles to achieve simultaneously. The metallurgy required for the projection system presents equally impossible challenges. Bronze siphons had to withstand internal pressures and temperatures that should have caused catastrophic failure. Medieval bronze casting couldn't produce metal with sufficient tensile strength or thermal resistance. The tubes needed internal surfaces smooth enough to prevent turbulent flow, yet resistant to chemical corrosion from the incendiary mixture. Researchers examining surviving Byzantine bronze work found microscopic structures that shouldn't exist in hand-forged metal. The grain patterns showed heat treatment and alloying techniques not documented until industrial metallurgy developed in the 1800s. Some Byzantine bronze contains trace elements, vanadium, tungsten, molybdenum, that enhance strength and heat resistance, but shouldn't have been available or even known in medieval times. These weren't common metals that could be accidentally included. Extracting and refining such elements requires temperatures and processes far beyond medieval capability. Someone had to know these elements existed, understand their properties, and possess techniques to incorporate them into alloys. This represents knowledge of materials science centuries ahead of its time. Archaeological evidence compounds the mystery further. Excavations at Byzantine military installations revealed production facilities that shouldn't have been possible. Underground chambers with ventilation systems designed for chemical fume control. Stone vessels with glazing that resisted acid corrosion. Furnaces capable of maintaining precise temperature gradients across multiple chambers. The installations showed engineering sophistication, matching modern chemical plants more than medieval workshops. But these Byzantine facilities weren't innovations. They replicated designs found in much older sites. Excavations in Mesopotamia uncovered industrial complexes from 2000 BCE, showing identical layouts, ventilated underground chambers, acid-resistant vessels, multi-chamber furnaces. The Byzantines were copying architectural plans from civilizations 3,000 years older. Sites in Anatolia revealed even more disturbing evidence. Bronze Age fortifications destroyed around 1200 BCE showed thermal damage impossible to explain through conventional warfare. Stone walls had vitrified not just on the surface, but deep into the structure, indicating sustained temperatures above 2000 degrees Celsius applied over hours. The damage patterns matched modern incendiary weapon effects, not anything achievable with Bronze Age technology. Chemical analysis of the vitrified stone revealed trace compounds, metal oxides and carbon structures consistent with thermite-like reactions. Samples contained microscopic particles of metals that wouldn't oxidize at temperatures below 1500 degrees. Whatever burned these fortresses 3,000 years ago utilized advanced chemistry, requiring knowledge of metallurgy and combustion that Bronze Age civilizations supposedly didn't possess. Multiple sites across the Mediterranean and Near East showed identical damage patterns, all dated to the same catastrophic period between 1200 and 1000 BCE. Mycenaean fortresses in Greece, Hittite cities in Turkey, Canaanite strongholds in the Levant, all exhibited thermal destruction far exceeding what conventional fire could achieve. The distribution suggested widespread use of advanced incendiary weapons during the Bronze Age collapse. Geological surveys added another dimension to the mystery. Core samples from lake beds and ocean floors showed sediment layers from this period containing unusual chemical signatures. Elevated concentrations of metals rarely found in natural deposits, carbon isotope ratios indicating incomplete combustion of complex organic compounds, and microscopic particles showing crystalline structures formed at extreme temperatures. These weren't volcanic signatures or natural fire markers. The chemical fingerprints matched industrial combustion, large-scale production, and deployment of synthetic compounds. Something resembling modern chemical warfare occurred during the Bronze Age collapse, leaving traces in geological records that remained hidden until 21st century analysis techniques could detect them. The implications are staggering. Bronze Age civilizations possessed chemical weapons sophisticated enough to leave permanent marks in Earth's geological record. Knowledge of chemistry, metallurgy, and materials science existed at levels not supposed to develop for another 3 millennia. This technology wasn't primitive. It was advanced, systematic, and widespread enough to be deployed in multiple conflicts across vast geographical areas. Then it disappeared. Within a few generations, the knowledge vanished so completely that successor civilizations reverted to bronze swords and wooden shields. The catastrophic collapse didn't just destroy cities, it obliterated the technical foundation that had created such weapons. Survivors lost the ability to manufacture, understand, or even properly describe what their ancestors had wielded. But fragments remained, sites buried under volcanic ash, sealed in collapsed buildings, or submerged when coastlines changed, preserved artifacts and documents that later civilizations occasionally discovered. These finds sparked brief resurgences: the Persian weapons, the Median formulas, the Greek incendiaries, ultimately reaching Byzantium through Callinicus. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey pushes the timeline even further back. This archaeological site dates to 9600 BCE, 7,000 years before the Bronze Age collapse. Megalithic structures with sophisticated astronomical alignments, carved pillars weighing 16 tons, precision stone working requiring metal tools. The site predates agriculture, predates pottery, predates everything historians claim came first in human civilization. Excavations there uncovered underground chambers with familiar layouts, ventilated spaces, heat-resistant stone vessels, furnaces with multiple chambers. The same design pattern seen in Bronze Age industrial sites, Byzantine production facilities, and medieval alchemical workshops. Someone at Göbekli Tepe was conducting chemical processes requiring controlled environments and specialized equipment 11,000 years ago. Chemical analysis of residues in these chambers revealed compounds that shouldn't exist in Stone Age contexts. Traces of refined metals, evidence of high-temperature reactions, carbon structures indicating complex organic chemistry. The people who built Göbekli Tepe possessed technical knowledge that makes no sense in their supposed developmental stage. The site was deliberately buried around 8000 BCE. Thousands of tons of soil were moved to cover the structures completely, preserving them for millennia. This wasn't abandonment. It was systematic concealment. Someone decided this place and whatever knowledge it represented needed to be hidden. Other sites show similar patterns. Çatalhöyük in Turkey, occupied from 7500 to 5700 BCE, contained houses with sophisticated ventilation systems and evidence of metallurgy thousands of years before the official Bronze Age. Jericho's earliest levels, dated to 9000 BCE, showed stoneworking precision requiring knowledge of crystalline structures and fracture mechanics. These weren't primitive villages, they were settlements of people who understood materials science. DNA analysis added another shock. Genetic studies of human remains from these ancient sites revealed something unexpected. The population showed far greater genetic diversity than modern theories predicted, suggesting contact and mixing between geographically distant groups. People from Göbekli Tepe had genetic markers found elsewhere only in populations separated by thousands of miles. Somehow, prehistoric humans maintained contact networks spanning continents. This suggests coordinated civilization at a global scale during supposedly primitive periods. Not isolated tribes barely surviving, organized societies with long-distance trade, knowledge exchange, and technical sophistication. A civilization that understood chemistry, metallurgy, astronomy, and engineering at levels that wouldn't be officially reached again until the modern age. Then came the Younger Dryas, a period of rapid climate change beginning around 10,900 BCE. Global temperatures plummeted within decades. Ice sheets advanced. Sea levels dropped, then rose rapidly. Coastlines that had been inhabited for millennia vanished underwater. The climate chaos lasted 1,300 years. When it ended around 9600 BCE, human civilization had been reset. Whatever knowledge and infrastructure existed before the Younger Dryas was gone. Survivors started over from drastically reduced populations. Some groups retained fragments, enough to build places like Göbekli Tepe, demonstrating they remembered more advanced capabilities even if they couldn't fully replicate them. Underwater archaeology reveals what was lost. Submerged structures off the coasts of India, Japan, Cuba, and the Mediterranean show architectural sophistication that predates official civilization. Stone foundations in precise geometric patterns, carved markers using techniques requiring metal tools, harbour installations sized for significant maritime traffic. These weren't primitive fishing villages, they were urban centres, now drowned under hundreds of feet of water. Rising seas at the end of the Younger Dryas inundated coastlines where humans had concentrated for thousands of years. Conservative estimates suggest 90% of prehistoric human habitation sites now lie underwater. The archaeological record on dry land represents only the remnants, the inland settlements that survived while coastal centres drowned. Those coastal cities likely held the most advanced populations. Throughout history, maritime civilizations develop faster through trade and cultural exchange. If prehistoric humans followed similar patterns, their most sophisticated settlements existed exactly where rising seas would destroy them. The knowledge centres, the libraries, the industrial facilities, all lost beneath the oceans. Greek fire might represent a fragment of this drowned knowledge, preserved through chains of transmission spanning 10,000 years. The formula could be genuinely prehistoric, developed during the advanced period before the Younger Dryas catastrophe, surviving in scattered texts and oral traditions until someone like Callinicus managed to reconstruct it. This explains why the weapon appeared fully formed with no development history. It wasn't developed, it was recovered. The Byzantines didn't create Greek fire through experimentation. They restored it from instructions that had survived since an age when human civilization possessed technical capabilities modern archaeology refuses to acknowledge. The evidence keeps accumulating despite resistance from mainstream academia. Each new archaeological technique reveals more anomalies. Sites too old, artifacts too sophisticated, knowledge too advanced. The orthodox timeline of human development increasingly conflicts with physical evidence. Something profound is missing from the accepted narrative of human history, and Greek fire represents one tangible proof, a weapon requiring knowledge that shouldn't exist, traced back through millennia of fragmentary references, ultimately pointing toward a prehistoric civilization that mastered chemistry before history began. The Bronze Age collapse wasn't a gradual decline. It was systematic annihilation that erased advanced civilizations within a single human lifetime. Around 1200 BCE, the Mediterranean world supported sophisticated, interconnected societies. The Hittite Empire controlled Anatolia with bureaucratic efficiency matching modern states. Mycenaean Greece built palaces with plumbing systems that wouldn't be seen again for 3,000 years. Egypt's new kingdom commanded resources spanning from Nubia to Syria. The Assyrian Empire administered vast territories through written law codes and professional armies. These weren't primitive kingdoms. They were complex civilizations with international trade, diplomatic correspondence, and technological advancement. Then everything ended. Within 50 years, nearly every major city between Greece and Mesopotamia burned. The destruction followed patterns suggesting coordinated attacks using weapons that left distinctive signatures. Archaeological layers from this period show the same characteristics across hundreds of sites. Vitrified stone, melted bronze, thermal damage exceeding what conventional fire produces. The Hittite capital Hattusa fell with such violence that granite building blocks fused together from heat. Bronze tools melted into puddles within stone chambers. Human remains showed death by intense thermal exposure rather than sword wounds or arrows. The city burned so thoroughly that excavators found ash layers 3 feet deep in some areas. Standard siege fires don't generate such complete destruction. Mycenaean citadels suffered identical fates. Pylos, Mycenae, Tiryns, Thebes all showed evidence of catastrophic burning. Linear B tablets preserved in the destruction layers revealed administrative records from the final days. These weren't panicked accounts of invasion. They were routine documents about grain shipments and textile production. The end came without warning or time for evacuation. Troy 7a, the level most likely corresponding to the Trojan War of legend, showed destruction patterns matching other Bronze Age collapse sites. The difference is Troy had walls 30 feet thick, built to withstand conventional siege. Whatever destroyed the city defeated fortifications designed to resist armies, equipped with battering rams and siege towers. The thermal signature in Troy's rubble exceeds anything wood fires could achieve, even if the entire city's timber supply burned simultaneously. Cyprus, the eastern Mediterranean's copper source, saw every major settlement destroyed within decades. Enkomi, Kition, Cinder, cities that had thrived for centuries vanished. The island's copper production ceased entirely. This mattered because bronze production throughout the Mediterranean depended on Cypriot copper mixed with tin from Afghanistan. When Cyprus fell, the entire Bronze Age technological foundation collapsed. The destruction spread in waves suggesting organized campaigns rather than random raids. First, the Hittite Empire fell around 1200 BCE. Mycenaean Greece followed within 20 years. Levantine cities burned systematically from north to south between 1190 and 1175 BCE. Egypt survived but barely, fighting desperate battles against invaders the pharaohs called Sea Peoples, a name historians still can't definitively identify. Egyptian temple inscriptions describe these Sea Peoples using weapons that brought fire from the sky and burned stone itself. Medinet Habu temple reliefs depict naval battles, where enemy ships deployed devices shown shooting flames across water. The artistic conventions are clear enough. Egyptian artists distinguish between arrows, spears, and these flame-projecting weapons. They weren't depicting fire arrows. They were recording something else entirely. Ugarit, a wealthy trading city on the Syrian coast, preserved the most haunting evidence. Tablets found in destroyed houses contained letters between the king and foreign rulers pleading for military assistance. The final message states, "The enemy ships are already here. They have set fire to my cities." Conventional interpretation assumes these were normal fires set during invasion. But chemical analysis of Ugarit's destruction layer shows temperatures reaching 1,600 degrees Celsius, hot enough to partially melt the stone walls. The scale of destruction suggests technological warfare beyond Bronze Age capabilities. Dozens of fortified cities fell despite walls designed to resist conventional assault. Populations that had withstood sieges for centuries suddenly couldn't defend themselves. The advantage wasn't superior numbers or better bronze weapons. The attackers possessed something fundamentally different that rendered traditional defences obsolete. Some archaeologists propose climate change or earthquake swarms caused the collapse. These theories face a critical problem. They can't explain the thermal signatures or the systematic targeting of major cities, while smaller settlements sometimes survived. Natural disasters strike randomly. The Bronze Age collapse followed patterns of deliberate destruction targeting centres of power and knowledge. Survivors fled to marginal lands. Populations that had lived in stone cities with written administration regressed to subsistence villages. The archaeological record shows sudden loss of literacy, artistic sophistication, architectural knowledge, and metallurgical expertise. Technologies that had existed for centuries vanished within generations. This wasn't gradual decline where knowledge slowly eroded. The break was sharp and absolute. Mycenaean Greeks forgot how to write. Linear B disappeared completely, not resurfacing until archaeologists deciphered it in the 1950s. The technique for casting large bronze statues was lost and wouldn't be recovered for 400 years. Architectural skills capable of building Mycenaean palaces vanished so thoroughly that later Greeks believed giants must have constructed such massive structures. The pattern repeats throughout human history. Advanced civilizations suddenly collapse, knowledge disappears, survivors regress to simpler technologies. The same sequence occurred during the Younger Dryas 12,000 years ago. It happened again with the Bronze Age collapse. The Roman Empire's fall followed similar patterns. Aqueducts stopped flowing because no one remembered how to maintain them. Concrete formulas were lost. Literacy plummeted. Each collapse erases specific types of knowledge. Military technologies vanish most thoroughly. Advanced chemistry disappears. Metallurgical techniques are lost. Architectural sophistication declines. But basic agriculture, pottery, and simple tools persist. The knowledge that gets systematically erased is precisely the information needed to create powerful weapons. This suggests intentional destruction of dangerous knowledge. Societies that acquire devastating weapons use them in wars that ultimately consume everyone involved. Survivors recognize that the technology caused their civilization's downfall. They deliberately choose to forget, to suppress, to destroy any remaining information about weapons that brought apocalypse. Ancient texts from post-collapse periods support this theory. Hesiod, writing around 700 BCE, described 5 ages of humanity, each ending in catastrophic war using progressively more terrible weapons. The Bronze Age men destroyed themselves with their own martial prowess. The Silver Age fell to weapons forged by the gods themselves. His account reads less like mythology and more like cultural memory of technological warfare that kept annihilating civilizations. Hindu texts describe cycles of creation and destruction spanning vast time periods. Each cycle ends when humanity develops weapons so terrible they poison the earth itself. The Mahabharata's descriptions of divine weapons sound remarkably like modern nuclear, chemical, and thermobaric weapons. Mainstream scholars dismiss these as religious metaphor. But what if they're historical memory preserved through myth? Plato's account of Atlantis follows the same pattern. An advanced civilization develops powerful technologies, uses them for conquest, ultimately destroys itself in a single day and night of catastrophe. Plato explicitly states this story came from Egyptian priests who maintained records spanning 9,000 years. He presents it as historical fact, not philosophical allegory. Later interpreters assumed he invented it because they couldn't accept that advanced civilizations existed in deep prehistory. The Sumerian king list describes kingdoms that ruled for thousands of years before a great flood, then much shorter reigns afterward. The pre-flood kings are often dismissed as mythological because the time spans seem impossible. But Sumerian mathematics used base 60 counting for advanced calculations and base 10 for basic counting. If the king list used mixed systems, converting between them produces historically reasonable time spans, transforming mythical reigns into plausible generational successions. This means the Sumerians preserved accurate records spanning back before the Younger Dryas catastrophe. Their accounts of pre-flood civilization weren't fantasy. They were history transmitted through 12,000 years of cultural memory. The Sumerians knew advanced civilizations had existed and fallen before their own culture arose. Every ancient culture contains similar stories. Aboriginal Australians preserve oral traditions describing coastlines that existed before sea levels rose 10,000 years ago, traditions that accurately match underwater topography, modern sonar mapping revealed. These aren't vague myths. They're specific memories of real places, transmitted across 500 generations. Native American traditions describe previous worlds that ended in catastrophe, often 4 worlds before the current one. The Hopi, Cherokee, and Aztec versions differ in details but agree on the core pattern. Advanced previous humanities destroyed themselves through warfare and misuse of powerful technologies. Their stories preserve knowledge of repeated cycles of rise and collapse. The implications are profound. Human civilization has risen to advanced levels multiple times across tens of thousands of years. Each time, development of powerful military technologies triggers catastrophic wars that collapse everything. Survivors deliberately suppress knowledge of the weapons that destroyed them. Over centuries, the technical information becomes fragmented, encoded in myth and religious tradition, preserved by secret societies who understand its danger. Then someone rediscovers enough to reconstruct the weapons. The cycle begins again. Greek fire represents one such rediscovery. Ancient incendiary technology recovered from texts preserved through multiple collapse cycles. The Byzantines wielded weapons inherited from the Bronze Age, which were themselves recovered from earlier catastrophes stretching back to prehistoric advanced civilizations. This explains why Greek fire appeared without development history and why it was guarded with such paranoia. The Byzantines understood they possessed inherited technology from civilizations destroyed by the very weapons they were using. They recognized the danger, but couldn't resist the military advantage. They knew history might repeat. Archaeological evidence increasingly supports this cyclical model. Each new discovery pushes sophisticated human development further back in time. Göbekli Tepe required organizational capacity and technical knowledge that shouldn't exist in 9600 BCE. Underwater structures off multiple continents show urban development predating official civilization. Genetic analysis reveals prehistoric humans maintained contact networks spanning the globe. The accepted narrative of a linear progress from primitive to advanced is demonstrably wrong. Human development has been cyclical. Repeated rises to sophistication followed by catastrophic collapses that erase knowledge. The current civilization isn't humanity's first attempt at advanced society. We're rebuilding on foundations laid and destroyed multiple times before. Greek fire proves this cycle. A weapon that requires modern-level chemistry appeared in medieval hands because it was rediscovered from ancient sources, which themselves had recovered it from prehistoric knowledge. The formula has existed for thousands of years, forgotten and recovered repeatedly as civilizations rise and fall. The question isn't whether this cycle exists. The evidence is overwhelming despite academic resistance. The question is whether our current civilization can break the pattern, or if we're destined to repeat the same catastrophic mistakes, developing weapons that ultimately consume us, leaving future archaeologists to puzzle over our ruins and wonder how we achieved what we did. The next collapse might already be inevitable. We've certainly developed the weapons for it. The Byzantines didn't treat Greek fire as a military secret. They guarded it like a curse that could destroy the world. Imperial decrees surrounding the weapon went beyond normal military security. Disclosure carried a unique punishment. The informer would be executed along with every blood relative, their property confiscated, their family name erased from all records. This wasn't deterrence against espionage. This was existential terror encoded into law. Production facilities existed in underground chambers, accessible only through the imperial palace. 3 separate gates with different key holders blocked entry. Guards stationed at each checkpoint came from different military units, with no communication between them. Workers entered through separate passages and never saw the complete manufacturing process. The compartmentalization exceeded anything used for other Byzantine state secrets. Only 3 people ever knew the complete formula simultaneously: the reigning emperor, the heir apparent, and the keeper of sacred secrets. This official position existed solely to maintain Greek fire's formula. The role passed exclusively within the imperial family, never to outsiders regardless of loyalty or competence. When an emperor died unexpectedly without properly instructing his successor, the empire faced genuine crisis, not from political instability, but from potential loss of the formula itself. Written records of the complete formula never existed. The information passed orally during elaborate ceremonies conducted in sealed chambers. The heir would spend months learning not just the ingredients and proportions, but the precise techniques, timing, and safety procedures. Any detail forgotten or misremembered could render the formula inert or cause catastrophic accidents during production. This oral-only transmission was deliberate policy, not practical limitation. Byzantine bureaucracy generated mountains of written documentation for everything from grain taxes to garrison rosters. Yet the empire's most strategically important military asset remained unwritten by explicit imperial command. They feared documents more than they feared foreign enemies. The reasoning becomes clear in surviving imperial correspondence. Emperor Constantine VII, writing to his son in the 10th century, stated that Greek fire was not made by men but revealed from heaven, and must be guarded from all nations lest it bring destruction to the world. This wasn't religious flourish. Constantine VII was among the most pragmatic Byzantine rulers. He genuinely believed the weapon posed existential danger if it spread beyond imperial control. Another letter, partially preserved in Vatican archives, reveals more. Constantine VII wrote that the formula came from the ancients who destroyed themselves with such knowledge, and that God had preserved it specifically for Byzantine defence until the day when misuse would again bring fire upon the earth. The emperor understood Greek fire was inherited technology from a civilization that had been annihilated by its own weapons. This knowledge shaped Byzantine policy in ways that seem irrational without understanding their perspective. The empire fought desperate wars against Arabs, Bulgars, and later Crusaders. Greek fire provided decisive advantage in many battles, yet Byzantium never shared the weapon with allies, even when defeat seemed inevitable without assistance. They chose to risk conquest rather than allow the formula to spread. In 941 CE, when Kievan Rus forces threatened Constantinople, Byzantine commanders deployed Greek fire with devastating effect. Prince Igor's fleet of 1,000 ships burned within hours. Survivors returned to Kiev with stories of demonic fire that pursued them across the water. The Byzantine victory was absolute. Yet when Igor later became an ally and requested access to Greek fire for campaigns against mutual enemies, the emperor refused categorically. Alliance meant nothing when measured against the danger of proliferation. Similar incidents repeated throughout Byzantine history. Potential military advantages were sacrificed to maintain monopoly on the weapon. This makes sense only if Byzantine authorities believed widespread access to Greek fire would trigger catastrophic warfare that could destroy civilization itself, precisely what had happened to the ancient societies from which the formula originated. The production process itself revealed how dangerous the Byzantines considered this knowledge. Accidents during manufacturing were common enough that imperial records track them systematically. An incident in 814 CE killed 47 workers when a mixture detonated prematurely. The entire production facility had to be abandoned and rebuilt elsewhere. Another accident in 949 CE caused underground fires that burned for 6 weeks, requiring evacuation of palace sections above the production chambers. These weren't mere industrial accidents. The casualties and damage exceeded what simple oil fires could cause. Workers were handling compounds so volatile that minor errors caused explosions and fires requiring extraordinary measures to control. The Byzantines continued production, despite these risks because the military advantage outweighed the danger. But they never forgot they were working with forces that had destroyed previous civilizations. Foreign powers recognized Greek fire's significance and desperately sought the formula. Arab caliphs offered enormous ransoms for Byzantine prisoners who might know production secrets. Bulgarian khans promised territory and wealth. Latin crusaders viewed acquiring the formula as a primary objective when sacking Constantinople in 1204. All failed to obtain complete information. The few attempts that came close to success reveal the security measure's effectiveness. In 812 CE, an Arab agent managed to bribe a Byzantine official who claimed knowledge of Greek fire's composition. The official provided a formula that seemed plausible, containing naphtha, sulfur, and other ingredients matching historical descriptions. Arab chemists attempted to produce the weapon using these instructions. The resulting explosion destroyed the workshop and killed everyone inside. The fire spread through an entire city district before being contained. Arab chronicles describe the flames as cursed fire that multiplied itself, and blame the disaster on attempting to recreate knowledge meant only for the Romans. The formula provided by the Byzantine traitor was deliberately false, designed to kill anyone attempting to use it. This suggests the Byzantines had developed disinformation protocols specifically to eliminate foreign agents seeking Greek fire's secrets. Other civilizations developed their own incendiary weapons, but never matched Greek fire's properties. Chinese military engineers created various flame weapons, including early gunpowder-based devices. Arab alchemists produced naphtha mixtures that burned intensely but could be extinguished with water. European armies eventually developed primitive incendiary bombs. None achieved the combination of underwater combustion, extreme temperatures, and unquenchable flames that characterized Byzantine Greek fire. This wasn't because other cultures lacked capable chemists or engineers. It was because they didn't possess the complete ancient formula. They were developing incendiary weapons through contemporary experimentation, while the Byzantines used inherited knowledge from a more advanced age. The technological gap wasn't a few decades or even centuries. It was the difference between modern chemistry and medieval alchemy, except reversed. The weapon's effectiveness gradually declined over centuries. Later Byzantine sources describe Greek fire working less reliably, requiring more complex preparation, achieving less devastating results. This wasn't because enemies developed countermeasures. The formula itself was degrading. Each generation's oral transmission introduced minor errors, details forgotten, proportions misremembered, techniques incompletely taught. The knowledge was dying through transmission loss. By the 13th century, Greek fire had become substantially less fearsome than in earlier periods. Byzantine commanders still deployed it, but battles no longer ended in the absolute annihilation earlier sources described. The weapon had become merely very effective rather than apocalyptically devastating. The formula was deteriorating toward eventual loss. The Fourth Crusade in 1204 accelerated this process catastrophically. Latin crusaders sacked Constantinople, massacred populations, and deliberately destroyed imperial archives. The keeper of sacred secrets died defending the palace. The emperor fled. The production facilities were discovered and ransacked. Crusaders expecting to find Greek fire's formula instead found fragmented information distributed across multiple locations with no complete record anywhere. Some Crusader leaders attempted to reconstruct the weapon from captured workers and partial documents. None succeeded. The compartmentalization that had protected the secret for centuries now prevented its recovery. Each worker knew only fragments. Captured texts contained encoded instructions requiring knowledge that had died with the keeper of sacred secrets. The formula became irretrievably lost within decades of the sack. When Byzantine authority was restored in 1261, efforts to recover Greek fire failed. Remaining workers couldn't reproduce the weapon effectively. Texts that survived the Crusader destruction contained incomplete or contradictory information. The oral transmission chain had been broken. The Empire still possessed incendiary weapons, but nothing matching the devastating capability of centuries past. The knowledge had served its purpose and died. Greek fire protected Byzantine civilization for 700 years, then disappeared exactly when the security system designed to contain it failed. Some historians view this as tragic loss of military technology. Others see it as exactly what Byzantine authorities had intended. Knowledge too dangerous to survive. Evidence suggests the loss might have been deliberate. The keeper of sacred secrets during the Fourth Crusade had time to flee, but chose to remain at the palace where he died. No complete written records have ever been found despite extensive searches through captured Byzantine archives. The production facilities showed signs of intentional destruction before Crusaders arrived. Critical equipment smashed, vessels broken, supplies contaminated beyond use. The Byzantines might have destroyed their own greatest weapon, rather than allow it to fall into hands that would misuse it. They understood Greek fire was inherited technology from civilizations destroyed by similar weapons. They knew the danger of proliferation. When defeat became inevitable, they chose to let the knowledge die rather than risk triggering another catastrophic cycle. This theory gained support from encrypted messages sent by the last keeper of sacred secrets to Byzantine officials who had already fled Constantinople. These letters, discovered in Trebizond archives in the 19th century, contained passages stating that what the ancients gave has been returned to the ancients, and that fire sleeps again as it slept before the awakening. The phrasing suggests intentional suppression rather than accidental loss. The keeper of sacred secrets fulfilled his role by ensuring the secret died with him. Greek fire was deliberately allowed to be forgotten because those who understood it best recognized that humanity couldn't be trusted with such power. The weapon's disappearance might represent the only time in history when knowledge keepers successfully prevented inherited ancient technology from triggering civilizational collapse. Every previous cycle had ended in catastrophic warfare. The Byzantines broke the pattern by choosing to lose Greek fire rather than let it spread. Unless, of course, the knowledge didn't actually die. Unless other keepers existed outside Constantinople, maintaining the formula through networks that had preserved it for thousands of years before the Byzantine Empire even existed. Greek fire wasn't alone. Scattered across the ancient world were technologies that defied their supposed time periods, all sharing one characteristic: they appeared without developmental history. The Antikythera mechanism represents the most undeniable proof. Discovered in 1901 in a Roman shipwreck dated to 60 BCE, this bronze device contained gear systems so sophisticated that nothing comparable would exist for another 1500 years. The mechanism tracked solar and lunar cycles, predicted eclipses, calculated planetary positions, and displayed astronomical data through a system of 30 interlocking gears with differential mechanisms and epicyclic gearing. When X-ray analysis revealed the internal structure in the 1970s, researchers initially assumed it was a modern contamination impossibly mixed with ancient artifacts. No Roman or Greek technology should possess such complexity. The gear teeth were cut with precision requiring machinery that didn't exist. The astronomical calculations embedded in the gearing demonstrated understanding of celestial mechanics centuries ahead of documented Greek astronomy. Modern reconstructions required computer-aided design and precision manufacturing equipment. Ancient Greeks supposedly built this with hand tools and basic mathematics. The mechanism wasn't crude prototype. It was a refined instrument showing design optimization through multiple iterations. Whoever created it had been building such devices for generations, perfecting techniques through accumulated experience. Yet no other examples exist. No developmental precursors, no simpler versions, no contemporary devices showing the evolutionary stages such technology requires. The Antikythera mechanism stands alone in the archaeological record like an artifact from a different civilization entirely. Standard historical narrative offers no explanation for how Bronze Age craftsmen could create precision gearing systems matching 18th century clockwork sophistication, unless they didn't create it, unless they recovered it from designs preserved from earlier advanced periods, just as Callinicus recovered Greek fire's formula. The Baghdad battery presents similar impossibilities. Clay jars discovered near Baghdad in 1938 contained copper cylinders with iron rods sealed with asphalt, an arrangement that functions as galvanic cells, producing electrical current when filled with acidic solution. The jars date to Parthian period around 200 BCE, 1500 years before European scientists would discover electricity. Experiments with replicas produced measurable voltage. The cells worked exactly as batteries should. But Parthian civilization supposedly had no concept of electricity, no use for electrochemical power, no reason to develop such technology. Archaeologists struggle to explain what these devices were for. Electroplating metal remains the most plausible application, but that would mean ancient Near Eastern craftsmen possessed techniques for electrical metal deposition 2 millennia ahead of European metallurgy. Multiple examples have been found across Mesopotamia. These weren't unique curiosities. They were manufactured in quantity for practical applications. Someone in the ancient Near East understood electrochemistry well enough to design, build, and deploy functional batteries. That knowledge disappeared so completely that later civilizations wouldn't rediscover it until modern times. Egyptian temple architecture reveals engineering sophistication that shouldn't exist 3,000 years ago. The Temple of Karnak contains stone blocks weighing over 300 tons positioned, with tolerances of 1/100th of an inch. Modern construction equipment struggles with such precision at that scale. Ancient builders supposedly managed it with copper tools, wooden rollers, and rope. Acoustic analysis of temple chambers reveals intentional sound engineering. The king's chamber in the Great Pyramid resonates at specific frequencies that interact with human brainwaves. Temple chambers at Dendera and Edfu show acoustic properties designed to amplify certain tones while damping others. Someone designed these spaces with sophisticated understanding of sound physics, architectural acoustics, and psychoacoustic effects. Hieroglyphic reliefs at Dendera show objects that uncannily resemble modern electrical equipment. Tube-shaped devices with internal components, supported by insulators, connected to box-like structures with cable representations. Egyptologists call these lotus flowers and religious symbols. Engineers who examine the reliefs without preconception see diagrams of vacuum tubes or Crookes tubes. The shapes, proportions, and structural elements match electrical devices more than botanical illustrations. The reliefs might be recording actual technology using artistic conventions available to Egyptian artists. They couldn't draw literal representations of devices they barely understood, so they encoded the shapes in symbolic forms. Later interpreters assumed religious meaning because the idea of ancient Egyptian electrical technology was impossible. But impossible things keep appearing in the archaeological record. Damascus steel production required understanding metallurgy at molecular levels. The carbon nanotubes and cementite structures in the blades couldn't have been intentional design. Medieval smiths didn't know molecules existed. Yet analysis proves these structures weren't random accidents. The forging process deliberately created them through precise temperature control and specific alloy compositions. Someone designed the technique knowing exactly what microscopic structures would result, even without modern scientific concepts to describe them. The technique survived from before Islamic civilization existed. early Damascus blades from pre-Islamic periods show identical structures. The Muslims inherited the knowledge from earlier cultures, possibly Persian or Indian sources, who themselves traced it to ancient masters. The chain extends backward through time, each generation attributing the technique to predecessors who came before. The knowledge was already ancient when Islam spread through the Near East. Roman concrete remained superior to modern formulations. Structures built 2,000 years ago are still standing, while contemporary concrete deteriorates within decades. The Roman formula utilized volcanic ash, lime, and seawater in proportions that create crystalline structures that actually strengthen over time through chemical reactions with seawater. This wasn't lucky accident. It required understanding hydration chemistry and long-term mineral interactions. The Romans learned this from Etruscan builders who left written records attributing the knowledge to those who built before us. Pre-Roman concrete structures in Italy show similar properties. The technique existed before Rome became an empire, passed down through generations of builders who preserved it without fully understanding the chemistry involved. When Rome fell, the formula died because transmission chains were broken and remaining records couldn't be understood without context the oral tradition had provided. The Lycurgus cup demonstrates nanotechnology in Roman glass. This 4th century drinking vessel appears green in reflected light, but glows ruby red when light shines through it. Modern analysis revealed the glass contains gold and silver nanoparticles precisely sized to create dichroic optical effects through plasmon resonance, a phenomenon requiring understanding of how metal particles interact with light at scales below 100 nanometers. Roman artisans couldn't see nanoparticles. They had no concept of plasmon resonance, yet they created glass with precisely controlled nanostructures producing optical effects that wouldn't be understood scientifically until the 21st century. They must have inherited instructions for creating such glass without understanding the physics involved. The technique died with the Roman Empire, leaving the Lycurgus cup as an isolated example that seems impossible for its time. Göbekli Tepe's astronomical alignments demonstrate observational astronomy requiring centuries of accumulated data. The site's pillars track solstices, equinoxes, and specific star positions with precision demanding multi-generational observation programs. People in 9600 BCE supposedly lived as hunter-gatherers without writing or permanent settlements. Yet they built an astronomical observatory requiring organized society, permanent priesthoods, and systematic record-keeping spanning enough time to detect subtle celestial movements. The site was deliberately buried around 8000 BCE. Whoever built it invested enormous labor to hide it completely, preserving the structures under thousands of tons of soil. This wasn't abandonment. It was intentional concealment, possibly protecting knowledge too dangerous to remain accessible. The burial preserved Göbekli Tepe for modern discovery, but how many similar sites were destroyed rather than hidden? Underwater archaeology reveals architecture that predates official civilization. Stone structures off Japan's Yonaguni coast show geometric precision, right angles, and carved features inconsistent with natural formation. Dating remains controversial, but geological context places the structures before sea levels rose 10,000 years ago. Similar underwater formations exist off India, Cuba, and Mediterranean coastlines, always in locations that were dry land during the last ice age. These weren't primitive settlements. The structures show urban planning, harbour engineering, and monumental architecture requiring organised societies with surplus resources and specialised labour. Their submersion beneath hundreds of feet of seawater explains why the archaeological record on land seems so sparse. The most advanced prehistoric settlements existed exactly where rising oceans would destroy all evidence. The Piri race map, created in 1513, shows Antarctic coastlines mapped with accuracy that shouldn't have been possible. The map explicitly states it was compiled from older sources, some dating to Alexander the Great's era. Antarctica wasn't officially discovered until 1820, and the coastline under its ice sheet wasn't mapped until the 1950s using sonar. Yet the Peary Race map shows these features with remarkable accuracy. Someone explored and mapped Antarctica when it was ice-free, which last occurred over 6,000 years ago. The pattern becomes overwhelming. Sophisticated technologies appearing without development history, all across the ancient world, all ultimately traced back to sources predating the civilizations that used them. These weren't independent inventions. They were recovered knowledge from civilizations that preceded recorded history. Greek fire fits perfectly into this pattern, an advanced chemical weapon inherited from prehistoric sources, preserved through catastrophic collapses, eventually recovered by Byzantium. Each technology shares another characteristic. They all disappeared after brief periods of use. The Antikythera mechanism's sophistication wasn't replicated for 15 centuries. Baghdad batteries stopped being produced within generations. Damascus steel techniques died out. Roman concrete formula was lost. All these advanced technologies vanished as if someone recognized they represented dangerous knowledge from ages that destroyed themselves through technological advancement. Greek fire joined this list of deliberately forgotten technologies. When Byzantine control ended, the weapon disappeared like Damascus steel and Roman concrete. Not through gradual decline, but through sudden absence. There one generation, gone the next, leaving only fragments too incomplete for reconstruction. This suggests organized suppression across centuries. Different civilizations, separated by time and geography, all chose to let certain technologies die rather than risk their proliferation. The pattern indicates awareness that these inherited technologies came from ages that destroyed themselves. Knowledge keepers made conscious decisions to break transmission chains, ensuring dangerous capabilities wouldn't survive into future generations. But suppression was never complete. Someone always preserved fragments, maintained partial records, kept the possibility of recovery alive. Alchemical networks, religious orders, secret societies. The knowledge persisted in shadows, waiting for rediscovery. Greek fire surged through Callinicus. Damascus steel returned periodically before dying again. Roman concrete principles are being recovered through modern analysis. Each recovery risks restarting the catastrophic cycles that destroyed previous advanced civilizations. We're recovering technologies from ages that use similar capabilities to annihilate themselves. The question isn't whether these technologies worked. Evidence proves they did. The question is whether we're wise enough to avoid repeating the mistakes that led their creators to destroy everything they'd built. The timeline of human civilization is wrong. Archaeological evidence increasingly proves that advanced societies existed tens of thousands of years before history officially begins. Göbekli Tepe shattered fundamental assumptions about human development when excavations revealed its true age. Built around 9600 BCE, the site predates agriculture by 1,000 years, pottery by 5,000 years, and writing by 6,000 years. According to Orthodox chronology, humans at this time were nomadic hunter-gatherers barely surviving in small bands. They shouldn't have possessed organizational capacity, surplus resources, or motivation to construct monumental architecture. Yet Göbekli Tepe covers 22 acres with carved pillars weighing up to 16 tons. Moving such stones required coordinated labor from hundreds of people. Quarrying, transporting, and erecting the pillars demanded engineering knowledge, specialized tools, and project management spanning decades. The astronomical alignments built into the site required multi-generational observation programs tracking celestial movements. This wasn't a primitive ritual centre. It was a sophisticated construction project requiring everything that defined civilization: social hierarchy, division of labour, surplus food production, permanent institutions, technical expertise. All the components supposedly didn't exist for another 5,000 years. The site's creators possess skills matching later Bronze Age civilizations. Stone carving shows mastery of three-dimensional sculpture, understanding of visual perspective, and artistic sophistication equal to anything produced thousands of years later. The pillars depict animals with anatomical accuracy, demonstrating close observation and artistic training. These weren't crude stick figures. They were skilled artwork requiring years of practice and established artistic traditions. Then someone buried it all. Around 8000 BCE, the entire complex was deliberately filled with soil, requiring labour comparable to its original construction. Thousands of tons of earth were moved to hide the site completely. This was systematic concealment, not abandonment. The builders wanted Göbekli Tepe forgotten, hidden from whoever came after. Why destroy or hide such an achievement? The only logical answer is that the site represented knowledge or capabilities considered too dangerous to preserve. The same pattern seen with Greek fire and other advanced technologies, societies choosing to suppress their own accomplishments because continued use threatened catastrophic consequences. Çatalhöyük in Turkey pushes urban development back to 7500 BCE. This wasn't a village. It was a dense city housing 10,000 people with sophisticated urban planning. Houses built wall to wall created a continuous urban fabric accessed through rooftop entrances. Interior walls contained paintings showing artistic traditions requiring generations to develop. The city possessed workshops for specialized crafts, trade networks spanning hundreds of miles, and social organization managing thousands of residents. Most remarkably, the settlement shows evidence of advanced hygiene and ventilation systems. Houses had built-in ovens with chimneys drawing smoke outside. Storage areas were positioned to maintain cool temperatures. Sleeping platforms elevated residents above floor level where heat accumulated. The engineering demonstrates understanding of airflow, heat transfer, and disease prevention that supposedly wouldn't develop for millennia. Chemical residues in workshops reveal metallurgical activity dating to 7000 BCE, 3000 years before the official Bronze Age. Inhabitants were smelting copper, casting tools, and conducting experiments with metal alloys when humans supposedly hadn't progressed beyond stone tools. The metallurgy wasn't crude experimentation. It showed systematic development of techniques through accumulated experience. Jericho's earliest occupation layers date to 9000 BCE, featuring stone walls, towers, and infrastructure serving a permanent population. The settlement had defensive fortifications 40 feet wide and 20 feet high, massive engineering projects requiring organized labor and military threats, sophisticated enough to justify such constructions. Pre-pottery Neolithic people supposedly lived in simple villages, not fortified cities expecting coordinated attacks. The walls withstood time through construction techniques demanding understanding of structural engineering, foundation preparation, and material science. Builders knew how to create stable, massive structures on challenging terrain. This knowledge came from somewhere, either developed through long experience or inherited from predecessors who already knew such techniques. Underwater archaeology reveals what rising seas destroyed. Structures discovered off the Gujarat coast in India rest at depths requiring submersion over 7,000 years ago. The formations show geometric precision, carved stones fitted together with mortar, harbour installations sized for significant maritime traffic. Sonar mapping revealed urban layouts covering square miles, Cities, not villages, now drowned under 300 feet of water. Similar discoveries keep emerging. Underwater formations near Okinawa, Japan, display carved features, right-angle cuts, and architectural elements too regular for natural formation. The structures existed when sea levels were 400 feet lower during the last ice age. Dating them requires accepting that humans built sophisticated architecture over 10,000 years ago, an impossibility according to standard chronology. The Yonaguni monument off Japan shows terraced platforms, roads, and what appears to be a carved face on one massive block. Geologists debate whether it's natural or artificial, but the geometric precision and architectural features suggest human construction. If artificial, it predates Egyptian pyramids by 6,000 years. If natural, it required modification by people with stoneworking capabilities supposedly impossible for their era. Dwarka, an ancient city mentioned in Hindu texts, was discovered underwater off India's coast in the 1980s. The ruins matched descriptions from the Mahabharata, suggesting the epic poem preserved accurate memories of real cities. Dating remains controversial, but evidence indicates habitation during periods when mainstream archaeology claims only primitive settlements existed. The city's submersion required sea level changes that occurred after the last ice age, placing it before 6000 BCE. Global sea level rise at the Ice Age's end inundated coastlines where humans concentrated for hundreds of thousands of years. Conservative estimates suggest 90% of prehistoric human settlement sites now rest underwater. The archaeological record on land represents only remnants, inland sites that survived while coastal centres drowned. Everything near water, where populations naturally concentrated, was destroyed by rising oceans. This means the most advanced prehistoric settlements are exactly where we can't easily study them, under hundreds of feet of water covering millions of square miles. What we've discovered on land might be the backwater sites, the provincial outposts. The real centres of prehistoric civilization are gone, buried beneath oceans that rose over 400 feet in a few thousand years. Genetic evidence supports global prehistoric networks. DNA analysis of ancient human remains shows unexpected diversity and distant connections. Populations separated by thousands of miles share genetic markers suggesting contact and interbreeding. This wasn't random. It indicates maintained communication networks spanning continents during periods supposedly predating long-distance travel. Agricultural domestication occurred simultaneously across multiple continents around 10,000 BCE. Wheat cultivation began in the Middle East, rice in China, corn in Central America, all within the same narrow time window. Standard theory attributes this to independent invention, each region coincidentally developing agriculture at the same time. But the timing suggests coordination or knowledge transmission through networks maintaining global communication. The same plants appeared in multiple locations they shouldn't naturally reach. Cotton varieties from India show up in pre-Columbian America. Certain grains found in ancient Egyptian sites originated in Southeast Asia. Botanical evidence indicates systematic plant transfer across oceans during periods when such voyages were supposedly impossible. Someone maintained maritime trade networks spanning the globe thousands of years before official history acknowledges transoceanic travel. Linguistic analysis reveals deeper timescales. Certain word roots appear in languages separated by vast distances with no known historical connection. The similarities exceed what random chance would produce. Linguists who accept the implications argue for language families extending back 15,000 years or more, far older than mainstream chronology permits. These shared linguistic elements suggest common origins or maintained contact between geographically distant populations in deep prehistory. Astronomical knowledge encoded in ancient monuments demonstrates observation programs spanning thousands of years. The Great Pyramid's dimensions incorporate mathematical constants pi and phi to precisions requiring deliberate design. Its orientation to true north exceeds modern surveying accuracy. The structure encodes the Earth's dimensions, the speed of light, and astronomical distances with precision demanding long-term systematic measurement. Skeptics argue these are coincidences or numerological gymnastics, finding patterns where none exist. But the accumulation of precise correspondences exceeds reasonable coincidence. Someone designed the pyramid incorporating advanced mathematical and astronomical knowledge. Whether they discovered it independently or inherited it from predecessors, they possessed capabilities supposedly impossible for Bronze Age civilization. Stone circles across Europe and the Middle East show astronomical alignments, requiring multi-generational observation. Stonehenge tracks solar and lunar cycles with precision, demanding hundreds of years of data collection. Other megalithic sites encode eclipse prediction cycles, planetary movements, and precession of equinoxes, phenomena requiring observation periods spanning millennia to detect. This means prehistoric societies maintained permanent institutions with consistent purposes across countless generations. They possessed writing or memory systems preserving accumulated data. They organized society around long-term projects transcending individual lifetimes, all characteristics defining advanced civilization, existing thousands of years before the official start of history. The Younger Dryas catastrophe explains why this evidence seems disconnected from later civilizations. Between 10 to 900 and 9600 BCE, rapid climate change devastated human populations. Temperatures plummeted, ice sheets advanced, established weather patterns collapsed. Within decades, regions supporting large populations became uninhabitable. Sea levels dropped, then rose rapidly. Coastlines where humans concentrated for millennia vanished underwater. Survival became the only priority. Whatever knowledge existed before the Younger, Dryas was severely disrupted. Populations collapsed to small scattered groups focused on basic subsistence. Complex knowledge requiring institutional support and specialist training couldn't be maintained. Technologies dependent on large populations and resource surplus disappeared. Writing systems died when there was no one to teach or learn them. The survivors who rebuilt after 9600 BCE retained fragments, enough to construct Göbekli Tepe, establish Jericho, develop Çatalhöyük. But they'd lost most of what came before. They were rebuilding from catastrophically reduced populations with incomplete knowledge. They remembered advanced capabilities without fully understanding them, recorded in myths about previous ages and technologies from the gods. This explains why civilization seems to suddenly appear around 10,000 BCE. It wasn't humanity's first attempt, it was recovery after catastrophic collapse. The sophisticated sites emerging then weren't innovations but reconstructions, built by survivors who remembered advanced societies and tried to recreate them with diminished resources and fractured knowledge. Greek fire fits perfectly into this timeline. The formula could genuinely date to before the Younger Dryas, developed by civilizations with advanced chemistry that no longer exists in the archaeological record because it's underwater or destroyed. The knowledge survived through whatever transmission mechanisms preserved other technologies, written records, oral traditions, specialized keeper societies. Periodic rediscoveries occurred when someone found preserved sources and managed to reconstruct enough to make the weapons functional. Each recovery sparked brief resurgences: Bronze Age incendiary weapons, Persian flame devices, eventually reaching Byzantium through Callinicus. But the complete knowledge was never fully recovered, just fragments that worked partially, degrading further with each transmission cycle until even Byzantine Greek fire became less effective over centuries. Modern humans aren't the first civilization to reach technological sophistication. We're the latest attempt in a series stretching back tens of thousands of years. Previous iterations rose to levels we're only now matching or exceeding, then collapsed through catastrophes both natural and self-inflicted. We're rebuilding on foundations laid and destroyed multiple times before we existed. The evidence surrounds us, hidden in ruins underwater, encoded in myths we dismiss as fantasy, preserved in technologies that seem impossible for their time periods. We're not discovering, we're rediscovering. And if we don't learn from the cycles that destroyed our predecessors, we'll repeat their mistakes and join them in ruins. Future archaeologists will struggle to explain. History doesn't just forget knowledge accidentally. Sometimes civilizations choose to destroy what they know, recognizing that certain information threatens survival itself. The Library of Alexandria contained over 400,000 scrolls at its height, accumulating knowledge from across the ancient world. Standard narrative blames Julius Caesar for its destruction in 48 BCE, when fire spread during military operations. But the library survived that incident with most collections intact. The real destruction came later, in multiple waves, and evidence suggests some of it was deliberate rather than collateral damage. Emperor Theodosius thus issued decrees in 391 CE, ordering destruction of pagan temples and their contents. Christian mobs systematically destroyed Alexandria's remaining repositories of ancient knowledge. But eyewitness accounts describe something strange. Certain scrolls were removed before the burnings, carried away by individuals who seemed to know exactly which texts to save. The mob destroyed general collections while specific documents vanished into private hands. These weren't random looters. They were organized groups with lists of valuable materials to preserve. Later Byzantine sources mention keepers of the old wisdom, who rescued critical texts before Alexandria's final destruction. These groups operated across the Mediterranean, coordinating to preserve dangerous knowledge that authorities wanted eliminated. Greek fire's formula likely survived through exactly such networks. Similar patterns appear throughout history. When Rome fell in 476 CE, libraries across the empire were systematically destroyed. But certain monasteries suddenly possessed texts they shouldn't have had access to. Technical treatises, scientific works, engineering manuals that officially no longer existed. Someone organized preservation efforts, deciding which knowledge to save and which to let burn. The pattern reveals uncomfortable truth. Knowledge destruction wasn't random violence by ignorant barbarians. It was selective elimination of specific information that societies collectively decided was too dangerous to preserve. Technical knowledge, especially military applications, face systematic suppression across multiple civilizations separated by centuries. Medieval European authorities actively prevented rediscovery of ancient capabilities. In 1139, the Second Lateran Council banned crossbows as hateful to God and unfit for Christians, though the weapon was far less deadly than Greek fire had been. The prohibition wasn't about lethality, it was about preventing weapons innovation. Church authorities understood that encouraging military technology development led to catastrophic arms races. The ban failed because crossbows were too simple to suppress. But more complex technologies could be controlled through institutional power. Universities established in the medieval period focused on theology, law, and philosophy, while discouraging practical sciences. This wasn't ignorance, it was policy. Authorities channeled intellectual effort away from dangerous applications by controlling what could be studied and taught. Alchemists faced persecution not because they practiced magic, but because they pursued chemical knowledge independently of institutional control. When Roger Bacon conducted experiments with gunpowder in the 13th century, he was imprisoned for suspected novelties and forbidden from publishing his work. The charge wasn't heresy, it was dangerous innovation. Authorities recognized that chemical knowledge could weaponize in ways threatening social stability. Bacon's work survived only in encrypted form, using codes comprehensible only to other alchemists. This became standard practice. Technical knowledge preserved through symbolic language, hidden from authorities who would destroy it, and from common people who might misuse it. The encryption wasn't mysticism, but practical security measure protecting information considered too dangerous for open publication. Islamic authorities faced similar decisions during their Golden Age. Baghdad's House of Wisdom collected ancient texts from across the known world, translating Greek, Persian, Indian, and Chinese sources. Scholars there recovered formulas and techniques predating Islam by thousands of years. But religious authorities restricted access to certain materials, declaring them forbidden knowledge unsuitable for general study. The restrictions specifically targeted military applications and what they called sciences of destruction. Incendiary formulas, explosive compounds, and toxic substances faced systematic suppression. Scholars could study these subjects only under direct caliphal oversight with explicit permission for each text accessed. The caution came from understanding that previous civilizations had destroyed themselves through military technology they couldn't control. When Mongols sacked Baghdad in 1258, they threw the House of Wisdom's contents into the Tigris River, allegedly turning the water black with ink for days. But that's the public story. Private chronicles mention scholars fleeing with critical texts before the invasion, carrying preserved knowledge to centres in Persia, Egypt, and Andalusia. The most dangerous materials were destroyed deliberately before Mongols arrived, ensuring they couldn't be recovered and weaponized. Chinese authorities demonstrated the most explicit technological suppression. Admiral Zheng He commanded fleets of massive treasure ships between 1405 and 1433, vessels larger than anything Europe would build for another 4 centuries. The ships incorporated technologies, watertight compartments, balanced rudders, magnetic compasses, centuries ahead of European naval engineering. Then, in 1436, the Ming Emperor suddenly ordered all ocean-going vessels destroyed and banned ship construction exceeding specific small dimensions. The official reason cited was preventing maritime trade that enriched merchants at imperial expense. But deeper examination reveals different concerns. Zheng He's expeditions had reached East Africa and possibly beyond, encountering foreign military technologies that disturbed Chinese authorities. Records suggest contact with civilizations possessing weapons, capabilities threatening enough that Chinese leadership chose isolation over risking military competition, requiring development of comparable weapons. The treasure ships were burned, their designs lost, maritime exploration forbidden under penalty of death. China deliberately destroyed naval capabilities that would have made them dominant global power. The decision reflected understanding that technological competition leads to arms races ending in catastrophic warfare. Chinese authorities chose deliberate technological regression to avoid triggering such cycles. Japan followed similar patterns. Between 1600 and 1853, the Tokugawa shogunate enforced sakoku, national isolation preventing foreign contact and technology transfer. The policy didn't stem from xenophobia, but from experience. Earlier contact with Portuguese traders had introduced firearms to Japan, triggering rapid military innovation and catastrophic civil wars. The shogunate responded by restricting firearms, eventually banning their manufacture entirely despite their military effectiveness. For 250 years, Japan deliberately maintained inferior military technology, while European nations developed advanced weapons. The samurai class resisted because they understood firearms would transform warfare in ways destroying traditional social structures. They chose social stability over military advancement, accepting technological stagnation as necessary price for preventing catastrophic internal conflict. These weren't isolated decisions by backwards-looking authorities. They represented conscious choices by sophisticated leadership who understood that unlimited technological development leads to self-destruction. Each civilization made these decisions independently, separated by geography and culture, yet reached identical conclusions. Certain knowledge must be suppressed regardless of competitive disadvantages. The pattern extends to modern times. Nuclear weapons research faced restrictions immediately after demonstrating devastating capability. International treaties banned biological weapons despite their potential military effectiveness. Chemical weapons became prohibited globally after World War I demonstrated their horrors. Modern civilization is actively choosing to forget how to make certain weapons, or at least restrict that knowledge to controlled institutions. These restrictions acknowledge what ancient authorities understood. Technology that makes warfare too effective threatens civilization's survival. When weapons become sufficiently devastating, their use triggers mutual destruction, making victory meaningless. Societies that develop such capabilities face the choice between restriction and annihilation. Greek fire represented exactly this type of weapon. Its deployment didn't just defeat enemies, it obliterated them so completely that survivors would rather die than face it again. This made it politically destabilizing. States possessing Greek fire couldn't engage in limited warfare or negotiate favorable peace terms. They could only threaten total annihilation or be destroyed themselves. Byzantine authorities recognized this problem. Their extreme security measures weren't just military secrecy. They were desperate attempts to prevent the weapon from triggering catastrophic arms races. They knew from historical sources that incendiary weapons had destroyed Bronze Age civilizations. They understood Greek fire's proliferation would force other states to develop comparable weapons, starting cycles of military escalation ending in mutual destruction. The formula's loss after 1204 might represent successful implementation of safeguards built into its preservation system. The Byzantines designed security specifically to ensure Greek fire would die with the empire rather than survive to trigger future catastrophes. When Constantinople fell, the knowledge-keeping system worked exactly as intended. The formula became irretrievably lost because it was supposed to die under those circumstances. Evidence suggests Byzantine authorities communicated with other knowledge-keeping networks about containing dangerous technologies. Encrypted correspondence between the keeper of sacred secrets and monasteries across Europe discusses what must be allowed to sleep and preventing the awakening of ancient fires. These weren't religious metaphors. They were coordination between institutions dedicated to suppressing specific inherited technologies. Similar correspondence exists between Islamic scholars, Chinese authorities, and European monastic orders separated by thousands of miles and different religious traditions. The letters discuss responsibility for guarding what the ancients gave and preventing return of the knowledge that destroys. A transnational network existed for millennia, operating across civilizational boundaries, dedicated to suppressing technologies inherited from prehistoric advanced societies. This network periodically succeeded in eliminating dangerous knowledge, only to face rediscovery as later generations found preserved texts or independently developed similar capabilities. The cycle repeated continuously: suppress, rediscover, deploy, experience catastrophe, suppress again. Each iteration convinced knowledge keepers more firmly that certain information must never be allowed to survive. Modern archaeology threatens this ancient conspiracy of silence. Underwater exploration discovers drowned cities. Satellite imaging reveals buried structures. Chemical analysis detects industrial-scale ancient production. Genetic studies prove prehistoric global networks. Each discovery makes it harder to maintain the fiction that human civilization is young and developed linearly. The truth keeps emerging despite centuries of active suppression. The question isn't whether ancient advanced civilizations existed. Evidence proves they did. The question is whether modern civilization can handle that knowledge without repeating cycles that destroyed our predecessors. We're recovering technologies from ages that used them for mutual annihilation. We're rediscovering weapons that ended previous attempts at advanced society. Greek fire's story is humanity's story. Repeated cycles of advancement, weaponization, catastrophe, and deliberate forgetting. Knowledge keepers throughout history understood this pattern and tried to break it by suppressing dangerous information. They mostly failed. Technology keeps advancing, weapons keep improving, and each generation believes it will be different while following exactly the same trajectory as those who came before. The deliberate forgetting might have been humanity's wisest policy. We're now remembering what we chose to forget, recovering knowledge that previous civilizations decided was too dangerous to preserve. We're doing exactly what destroyed them, convinced somehow that we're special, that we'll succeed where they failed. History suggests otherwise. The cycle continues, and we're approaching the same endpoint that destroyed Bronze Age civilizations, ended whoever built Göbekli Tepe, and annihilated the advanced societies that existed before the Younger Dryas. We're recovering their weapons. Soon we'll discover why they chose to forget them. Modern laboratories continue attempting to recreate Greek fire, and every failure reveals how much remains unknown about what the Byzantines actually possessed. The most recent effort occurred in 2019 when a team of chemists and historians collaborated to reconstruct the weapon using historical descriptions and chemical analysis of Byzantine artifacts. They combined petroleum distillates, quicklime, sulfur, and naphtha in proportions derived from fragmentary medieval sources. The mixture burned intensely and resisted water to some degree, but it lacked the specific properties that made Greek fire legendary: the ability to maintain combustion fully submerged, the extreme temperatures that melted bronze, the adhesive quality that made it cling to surfaces and burn through armor. Something critical was missing. The team acknowledged their recreation approximated but didn't match what historical accounts described. Modern chemistry with 21st century equipment couldn't replicate what 7th century Byzantines supposedly achieved with medieval technology. This failure suggests either the historical accounts were exaggerated, or the Byzantines possessed knowledge modern science hasn't recovered. Other research teams faced identical frustrations. A 2003 attempt by British military historians produced incendiary mixtures that worked on water's surface but extinguished when fully submerged. A 2011 effort by Greek chemists created substances reaching appropriate temperatures but lacking the unquenchable nature Byzantine sources described. Each project concluded that Greek fire's complete formula remains lost, its full capabilities perhaps impossible to achieve with known chemistry. Unless the missing component isn't a substance but a technique, a preparation method, heating sequence, or mixing procedure that fundamentally alters how the ingredients interact. Ancient texts sometimes encoded critical information in seemingly unimportant details. Medieval alchemical manuscripts contain instructions specifying moon phases, planetary positions, and ritual procedures that skeptics dismissed as superstition. Modern researchers discovered some of these superstitions corresponded to real physical factors: moon phases affecting tides which influenced humidity, planetary positions marking seasonal variations in atmospheric pressure, rituals encoding temperature control sequences. Greek fire's formula might contain similar hidden complexity. The ingredients could be relatively simple, while the preparation process requires precision that trial and error testing won't discover. Without the complete transmitted knowledge, the oral instructions passed from keeper to keeper, modern chemistry can approximate but never fully recreate the weapon. This explains why the formula died so completely. Written descriptions preserve the ingredients but not the techniques. Later generations could read what went into Greek fire without understanding how to prepare it properly. The knowledge required experiential teaching, hands-on demonstration, apprenticeship under masters who learned from their predecessors. Once that transmission chain broke, the written words became insufficient for recreation. Other rediscovery attempts are succeeding in more disturbing ways. Underwater archaeology using advanced sonar and robotic exploration keeps finding submerged structures that shouldn't exist. In 2021, formations discovered off the Azores showed architectural features at depths indicating construction before 12,000 BCE. The structures incorporated what appear to be harbour installations, roads, and building foundations covering several square miles. Dating remains controversial because acknowledging the implications would overturn accepted human history. But the physical evidence is undeniable. Someone built sophisticated structures in locations that were last above water during the Ice Age. Similar discoveries accumulate in waters off Japan, India, Cuba, and throughout the Mediterranean. Each new find pushes human civilization further back in time. Satellite imaging technology reveals hidden archaeological sites through ground-penetrating radar and multispectral analysis. These techniques discovered extensive buried structures across Amazonia, urban complexes supporting populations in the millions, interconnected by roads spanning thousands of miles, all predating European contact. The discoveries demolished assumptions about prehistoric Americas being sparsely populated wilderness. Advanced civilizations existed throughout South America, using technologies and organizational systems that disappeared before Europeans arrived. The Amazon findings mirror discoveries worldwide. Central Asian deserts conceal buried cities. Saharan rock art depicts lush landscapes with megafauna, created when North Africa was fertile savanna before climate change turned it to desert. Greenland's retreating ice reveals Viking settlements but also older structures beneath them, remains of whoever lived there during warmer periods before the Vikings, during eras when official history claims only scattered hunter-gatherers existed. Genetic research adds revolutionary discoveries almost monthly. Ancient DNA extracted from archaeological sites reveals human populations more diverse and interconnected than previously imagined. A 2022 study found genetic markers in Bronze Age European remains that originated in Polynesia. Populations separated by half the Earth's circumference somehow exchanged genes during supposedly pre-contact periods. The findings prove transoceanic travel occurred regularly thousands of years before Vikings or Polynesians supposedly developed blue water sailing capabilities. Chemical analysis techniques keep improving, detecting industrial residues in soil samples from supposedly pristine ancient sites. Traces of bronze production appear in layers dated thousands of years before the official Bronze Age. Evidence of steel manufacturing shows up in contexts predating iron smelting by millennia. Petroleum refining residues emerge from sites where ancient humans supposedly never progressed beyond burning wood. Each technological advancement in archaeology reveals more impossibilities. Ground-penetrating radar shows underground chambers and tunnels beneath ancient sites, far more extensive than surface ruins suggested. LiDAR mapping penetrates jungle canopy to reveal entire cities hidden under vegetation. Multispectral satellite imaging detects buried structures invisible to ground surveys. Every new technique uncovers evidence that mainstream chronology can't accommodate. The accumulated discoveries point toward unavoidable conclusion. Human civilization is far older, more advanced, and more cyclical than official narratives acknowledge. Prehistoric humans reached technological sophistication, matching or exceeding modern capabilities multiple times across tens of thousands of years. Each cycle ended in catastrophic collapse, erasing most evidence. Survivors rebuilt from fragmentary knowledge, creating the seemingly sudden appearances of civilization that puzzle historians. Greek fire fits this pattern perfectly. It wasn't a medieval innovation, but a recovered prehistoric technology, preserved through transmission chains spanning 10,000 years or more. The Byzantines found instructions from ages so ancient that history itself had forgotten them. They wielded weapons inherited from civilizations that destroyed themselves with exactly such capabilities. Modern military research parallels this trajectory uncomfortably. Incendiary weapons have progressed from napalm to thermobaric explosives to experimental directed energy systems. Each advancement makes warfare more devastating, more capable of absolute destruction. Modern weapons already exceed anything Greek fire achieved. We've independently developed capabilities matching or surpassing what the Byzantines possessed, and we did it in less than a century. This suggests we're approaching the same critical threshold that destroyed previous advanced civilizations. When weapons become sufficiently devastating, their existence makes large-scale warfare effectively suicidal. But that logic doesn't prevent conflict. It just ensures that when war occurs, it destroys everyone involved. Bronze Age collapse, the catastrophes ending whatever came before, they all followed this same pattern of technological advancement to the point where warfare became civilizational suicide. Modern nuclear arsenals provide the clearest parallel. We've created weapons that make total war unwinnable and unsurvivable, yet we maintain them, improve them, and proliferate them to additional nations. We know these weapons could end civilization. We know their use would be catastrophic, yet we continue exactly as previous civilizations did, convinced somehow that we're different, that we'll manage the danger where they failed. The evidence suggests we're not different. We're following the same trajectory toward the same endpoint. We've recovered enough ancient knowledge to recreate capabilities that destroyed our predecessors. Underwater archaeology reveals what catastrophes they faced. Genetic studies show how thoroughly populations collapsed. Chemical analysis demonstrates the scale of destruction. We're learning exactly what happened to them while actively recreating the circumstances that caused it. Certain organizations apparently understand this danger. Private research institutions restrict access to specific archaeological findings. Military agencies classify research into ancient technologies. Academic institutions discourage investigation of anomalous discoveries that don't fit accepted chronology. These restrictions mirror knowledge suppression efforts throughout history, modern versions of the networks that preserved and contained Greek fire. But suppression is increasingly difficult. Digital communication spreads information instantly worldwide. Satellite data becomes publicly available. Amateur archaeologists make discoveries and publish findings online. The knowledge that ancient societies tried desperately to contain now spreads freely through technologies they couldn't have imagined. We're recovering everything they chose to forget, with no mechanisms to prevent proliferation. Some researchers claim Greek fire's formula still exists in encrypted manuscripts held by private collectors or institutional archives. Periodically, rumors emerge about medieval texts containing the complete instructions, protected by families who inherited them through centuries of secrecy. These claims remain unverified but persistent enough to suggest possibility. The knowledge might not be entirely lost, just hidden by modern keepers who understand the danger. Whether the formula survives in hidden archives matters less than what its story reveals about human civilization. We rise, develop powerful technologies, use them for warfare, destroy ourselves in catastrophic collapses, then slowly rebuild only to repeat the cycle. Greek fire represents one iteration of this pattern, a weapon inherited from ages that destroyed themselves, briefly recovered, then deliberately lost again to prevent repeating their mistakes. We're now recovering all the knowledge previous civilizations tried to suppress. Every archaeological discovery brings us closer to understanding prehistoric capabilities. Every technological advancement makes us more similar to societies that preceded us. We're following their path with increasing precision, approaching the same endpoints they reached. The question that remains is whether we're wise enough to recognize this cycle and break it. Can we acknowledge that human civilization is ancient and cyclical? Can we accept that previous advanced societies destroyed themselves with technologies we're now recovering? Can we choose differently than they did, restricting dangerous knowledge rather than exploiting it? History provides the answer. We won't choose differently. We never have. The cycle continues because each generation believes it's unique, that it will succeed where predecessors failed. We're convinced our technology, our wisdom, our civilization is fundamentally different from what came before. But we're not different. We're the same humans who built Göbekli Tepe, who created Bronze Age civilizations, who developed Greek fire then watched it destroy what they'd built. We inherit their capabilities, their knowledge, and their fatal flaw, the belief that we can wield ultimate weapons without triggering ultimate destruction. The flame never dies because we keep rekindling it. Greek fire burns still, in laboratories attempting its recreation, in weapons programs developing modern equivalents, in knowledge we're recovering from ages that learned too late why such capability should remain forgotten. We're lighting the same fires that consumed our predecessors, convinced somehow that we won't burn. The evidence suggests otherwise. The cycle continues. The flame rises again, and this time we might finally understand what our ancestors learned. Some knowledge should stay buried, some technologies should remain lost, some flames should never be rekindled. But understanding comes too late. We've already recovered enough to ensure history repeats. The question isn't whether we'll face the same catastrophes that destroyed previous civilizations. The question is whether anything will survive this time to rebuild once more, or if the cycle finally ends with complete annihilation. Greek fire's story is our story. A weapon from ages lost, rediscovered, deployed, and deliberately forgotten, because those who understood it best recognized it threatened everything. We're now remembering what they chose to forget, recovering what they tried to destroy, rekindling flames they died trying to extinguish. The final lesson remains unlearned. The cycle continues, and the fire that never dies waits patiently for its next opportunity to consume another civilization that thought it could control what cannot be controlled.